Before I even begin to answer this question, I think it's only fair that I go into Google and find out what others have to say about James Cameron's 1997 epic, Titanic. I personally like the film, and I don't want this to be a video of me gushing over the film and giving it glowing reviews and positive praise, because the film doesn't entirely deserve that. James Cameron, as a creator and a visionary, might, but the film, the final product in itself, maybe doesn't. I think it's only fair to go onto Google and find out what others have to say about this film. Brace yourselves. The reason why there is such strong hatred towards this film in particular is because whenever people try to find photos of the actual Titanic on the web nowadays, all they seem to find are photos from the movie. Also, the fact that it mixes fictional characters with characters based on real survivors is pitiful. The film was slapped together, most likely in 2 minutes, but they decided to extend the film so that it would reach 3 to 4 hours. The ship wasn't built to full length, as it should have been, if you were trying to make a more accurate rendering of the Titanic. What Cameron did was a cheap shot where all he did was have the same side filmed twice so it would appear that the ship was built to her full length. The real Titanic, not Cameron's knockoff, was 882.5 feet long. So there we have it. The film Titanic by James Cameron, released in 1997, which was the highest grossing film of all time, only surpassed by another James Cameron film, Avatar, was an awful film because the ship they built wasn't the full length of the real ship, and they used fictional characters. And the reason I read this particular review of the film, and I use the term review very lightly, is because it kind of encapsulates a multitude of feelings and animosity and opinion towards this film. A lot of people think that the fictional aspect of the film is what makes it flawed and unenjoyable. People think that Jack and Rose being introduced into the story, and by extension Ruth and Cal, cheapens Titanic and cheapens the film. But I don't agree. I don't think that the issues with the film lie within those characters. Personally, I think the issues in the film affect every character, historical or fictional. And those problems can absolutely be traced back to James Cameron, but they do not detract and take away from the fact that the man is incredibly skilled and good at what he does. As for the second point this person made about the ship not being the full length, as in the set that was built not being the full length, did it have to be? So there's animosity towards Jack and Rose, the fictional characters of the film, and there's resentment towards the inaccuracies of the portrayal of the real historical event. But I think this person is missing the point. I think that the film Titanic falls short in one major category. But even in that respect, I think there's a reason. Now, I personally think the film falls short in its script. I think the script for Titanic is kind of crap, with lines such as, what's the artist's name? Something Picasso. Something Picasso. He won't amount to a thing. He won't. Trust me. Okay. Yikes. That's just one of the first among many cliche and stereotypical and cringy lines of dialogue given to not only the fictional characters, but the real historical characters of the film. I think the script fails a lot of these actors, a lot of these characters, but I can understand why the script at some point seems to be so juvenile and seems to be so base. And the reason for that is thanks to the year that the film came out. If you look at the films that came out in 1997, the same year that Titanic was released, you'll see that you had films such as Air Force One, Alien Resurrection, Anaconda, Flubber. So it wasn't exactly a very highbrow and zenith of artistic integrity kind of year for films. But that's not to say Titanic was awful, and that Titanic only won 11 Oscars out of 40 nominations because it was up against a pile of dumpster fire. Not at all. That's to say that the sensibilities, the tastes, and the attitudes of the mid to late 90s were just, people wanted a bit of romance, they wanted a bit of action, they wanted some thrills. They weren't really looking for anything art house or intellectual. Titanic ticked the boxes that it had to tick. It had the romance, it had the action, it had the disaster, it had it all. And really, reviews for the film Titanic were pretty good. When the film first came out, reviews were fine. They thought it was a good film, well written, amazing special effects for the time. James Cameron and his team created a lot of the effects in order to get the shots they wanted. But when Leo-mania began, that was kind of when things started to spiral out of control. The film was number one at the box office for a ridiculous length of time and became the highest grossing film of all time, as I've already mentioned. And a massive part of that was because young girls and young boys, young men, young women were buying multiple movie tickets to go and see the film again and again and again because Leonardo DiCaprio, not my type, not my thing. Well, in 1997, now, different story. But 1997 Leonardo DiCaprio, people loved that. People loved what he was, and people wanted to keep seeing that. And that was kind of what dragged the film down in popular opinion. It went from being this historical, somewhat factual drama to being a chick flick, to being something that could be mocked because, well, girls like Titanic and, only girls are going to see it because of Leo. And I think it's really unfair that all the work, the time, the research and the effort that went into that film meant that its impact and its standing in Hollywood and pop culture was lessened. Because it was viewed as a girls' film. I really do think that's unfair. In terms of the script, when you have 90s media being what it is, films such as Air Force One, Anaconda, Alien Resurrection, and Flubber, and you have the Edwardian era in which Titanic sank, the two of them brought together, it's melodrama. It's absolute melodrama at its finest. It is black and white. You've got villains, you've got heroes. You've got damsel in distress, you've got young, adventurous, confident, third-class passenger who drags them out of that distress. People complain about the dialogue, people complain about the characterization, but it was what it was for a very good reason. you did have these archetypal characters in 1912 during the Edwardian era. You know, you had Thomas Andrews and Captain Smith and the band who played on. You had these people who died and were seen as heroes for dying, and you had people like Bruce Ismay, who was villainised instantly for surviving, despite the multiple accounts of him being forced into the boat by First Officer William Murdoch, despite him helping to load the lifeboats, and despite him only entering the boat under the orders of William Murdoch when there were no other women and children to be seen on that area of the ship. You have the Edwardian mindset, which diluted Chinese survivors into being creatures and falsely spread reports that these Chinese survivors had dressed as women and had hid under the seats on lifeboats in order to survive. You had the Edwardian era creating caricatures, and then you've got the mid to late 1990s that really just wants to digest caricatures. You know, they want to go to the cinema and they want to see drama, they want to see cinema, and a big part of script writing is who's your good guy, who's your bad guy, what do they need, what do they want, what's their objective, how do they get there, what are the obstacles. James Cameron was working within the parameters and the constructs that he had to work with, and based on all of that, I actually think he did an okay job. I really do. Now, in terms of the love story, because the love story is something that a lot of people seem to hate. Look at the Twilight Saga. Look at any kind of TV show, be it Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or Friends, or Breaking Bad. Anything. You've got so much time to develop these characters. You've got so much time to explore their friendship dynamics, their relationship dynamics, their personalities, their evolving kind of sense of self and what they need and want from other people. Titanic, despite it being a very long film, so long in fact that it was released on 2 separate tapes, but it's still a movie. It's not a saga. You know, it's not 6 or 8 hours long. It's not a TV series, which is years long. It's at most 4 hours long. Even if you include all the deleted scenes, it's maybe 5.5 hours long. People complained about the love story aspect of it. You know, Rose and Jack falling in love so quickly over not even a full day. And Cal being so evil and riddled with jealousy that he's willing to chase him through a sinking ship and shoot at them. And okay, personally that's something that I think maybe a bridge too far. You know, there were people all around them and he's shooting down a staircase which still had people coming up it and going down it. Like, it was a bit of a stretch, it was a bit of a leap. But you've got to condense that love story into one film. And Jack and Rose, you know, Kate and Leo, the characters they're playing are very young. Rose has lived a very sheltered life. She's no doubt very naive of how things actually work. And Jack, he just kind of takes everything in his stride. And maybe they did think it would all work. You've got to condense that love story and the jealousy from Cal in a film that is 3 hours, maybe a little bit over. And in order to do that, okay, maybe you do sometimes have to have things seem rushed or have characters fall in love the way they would fall in love in a Disney cartoon. But again, that comes back to the whole melodrama thing. I think James Cameron did a good job of showing Rose's inner turmoil and struggle and unhappiness with Cal and with her life, and showing Jack's love for life and his ability to take a bad situation and make it good. or to take, a string of bad luck and make it work in his favour. Now, there's a movie trope known as the manic pixie dream girl, and it is most evident in films like 500 Days of Summer and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. But this same trope can be applied to Jack's character. Now, the trope of the manic pixie dream girl is someone who comes into the main character's life, and the main character is usually a guy, and the guy is depressed, he's down on his luck, he's not happy, he doesn't like his job, he's unlucky in love, and this girl is just so charismatic and so enthusiastic and so confident and so funny and quirky. I mean, Zooey Deschanel was perfectly cast in the film 500 Days of Summer. And interestingly, Kate Winslet plays the manic pixie dream girl in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Now, this character's sole purpose is to come into the main actor's life, be it Jim Carrey or Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and change their life and make them see that life is worth living, and to make them more confident and more sure of themselves and more happy. But Jack Dawson, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, is probably one of the first examples of a male manic pixie dream girl, manic pixie dream boy. He is just so perfect, He comes into Rose's life, who's down on her luck, who's unhappy, who doesn't see the point of anything. I mean, they first meet when she's trying to kill herself. There's no better example of a manic pixie dream character than in that scenario. And he comes into her life, he does what he needs to do, and her life is improved from that. James Cameron said himself when he was on Mythbusters, and they were debating the whole concept of, could two people have fit on the door? I think instead of people debating whether two people could have fit on the door, they should be debating whether or not Rose had died at the end of the film. Because if she did die, why did she go to heaven surrounded by a bunch of people, most of the people she didn't know at all, and was kissing a guy that she'd only known for a few days, let alone her husband, who she'd been married to, after the sinking? I think people should be debating that. But that's besides the point. The fact that Jack couldn't fit on the door, and he then died because he froze in the water. James Cameron said himself that was meant to happen. It was meant to happen because the script said it was meant to happen. And by that, he kind of means Jack had served his purpose. His time was up. His time in the script was gone. And the reason for that is because he'd served his narrative purpose. As a character, he'd done what he needed to do for Rose. For her to roll off the door and swim over to the officer and take his whistle and live and be saved. When he first met her, she was trying to kill herself because she thought she was beyond saving. I think people have taken against the film Titanic because it went from being an action drama to being perceived as a romance chick flick. I think people took against it largely because of that. But people don't take into account the time period in which the film was set, when the film itself was made, and the reasons that certain choices were decided upon in terms of the script and the characterization. Now, I'm not saying it's all perfect. Officer Murdoch shooting himself purely for some drama was a big mistake, and actually the family of First Officer William Murdoch, who was born in Dalbeattie in Scotland, sued 20th Century Fox because of that decision. So I will be the first person to admit, and I'm sure James Cameron as well will be the first person to admit, that not every decision he made was the best decision. In fact, some decisions were just wrong. And when it comes to the script, yes, I will forever go to the something Picasso line, because it's just, we all know who Picasso is. Stop it. I think the film is good. I think it's a good film. I think it's a very well made film. I think many people will say, I don't like the script, I don't like the characters, but the effects, those effects are good. And that's one thing that can't be taken away from the film. And okay, there are certain scenes I watch nowadays. The scene in particular where Rose is sitting in the first class lounge and her mother is talking with the Countess of Rothes and someone else, Madeline Astor possibly, about Rose decided she wanted lavender. She knows I detest the colour, so she did it out of spite when she's talking about the bridesmaids' dresses for the wedding with Cal. And Rose is just, zoning out, and she's watching this young girl who is being taught etiquette, and she's being taught to place a napkin on her lap and, how to position it. The background for that is CGI, because James Cameron didn't build a set for the first class lounge, but he wanted to set that particular scene in the lounge. And that's the only scene really that I've watched where the CGI hasn't been great. I think it's quite noticeable that the people behind Rose and the room itself are CGI. Having said that, that is the only scene where I think it falls flat. I think beyond that, it's a very enjoyable film. I think the fact that it begins in the present day and, kind of jumps a few times between the present day and 1912, I've never seen a problem with that. I actually think it's a really good setup. I think if you're going to introduce these fictional characters, it's quite good to have the narrative structure of it being one of the main characters telling the story. So you're not just watching these random characters that were completely fabricated. You're being told the story by one of those people. I actually think that's a really clever way to do it. And the MacGuffin of the necklace, that was, the necklace doesn't actually matter. The necklace is just something that brings all these people together. It brings Brock Lovett and it brings Rose Calvert together. I don't see an issue with it. And people complaining so much about the script, the one major Oscar it didn't win was for its screenplay. Titanic didn't win any Oscars for its script. It didn't. And I think people who hate the film for its script should take that on board and move on. So, to summarise, I do think Titanic is a good film. I do. I think it's well written. I think it's very well directed. I think the special effects are incredible, especially for the time. I think the fact that so much of it was done practically is what helps it to hold up to this day. I enjoy the film. I might have a personal bias because I am a massive Titanic enthusiast. But being a Titanic enthusiast doesn't mean that you're automatically a fan of the James Cameron film. I actually, on a daily basis, see a lot of hatred and criticism towards the film. But I bet the James Cameron film, largely, is what brought a lot of people into the Titanic community. Whether they have stuck with the film since joining the community, that's a different story. And I think a film that seeped into the public consciousness as much as Titanic did, with the "I'm flying, Jack," or "It's been 84 years." A film that's as quotable and memorable as Titanic can't just be ignored. It's had an impact. And even if you don't ignore it, to just outright say it's bad, but really to only blame its historical inaccuracies and the fictional characters on why it's bad, I think is just wrong. If you take away Jack and Rose, and let's say that James Cameron built every single inch of the ship, inside and out, would that make it better to those people? Probably not. because I think a large part of what made the film repulsive to some people, in hindsight, is the casting of Leonardo DiCaprio and the 90s sensibilities of the script. But I think it's a good film. You know, personally, I like it. I do. And if this hasn't changed your mind about the film Titanic, that's fine. You know, I wasn't looking to change anyone's mind, but I do think it's interesting to see why people dislike the film and kind of dissect that and discuss that, because I just think it's interesting that what was the highest grossing film of all time is probably one of the most resented films of all time and one of the most mocked. And I don't think it's fair. And I think that the reasons for it are flimsy. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to leave a comment and let me know what you think of James Cameron's 1997 epic Titanic. What your favourite scene is, if you like it, if you don't like the film, do you like Jack and Rose, do you think it would have been better without them? Or what's your favourite Titanic film? You know, do you prefer SOS Titanic, A Night to Remember? Let me know in the comments. And be sure to like this video and share it with anyone who is also interested in Titanic, like we all are. It'd be good to, you know, spread this video out and let more people know that there's a YouTube channel that is dedicated to Titanic and talking all things Titanic. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. The problem isn't Jack and Rose, it's Jack. Rose should have gone with Cal. I mean, Cal was the better looking of the two men. He had his problems, you know, he shouted a lot and he was quite aggressive and he clearly had anger issues. If I was Rose, I'd have, you know, had my fun with Jack and then I'd have been like, bye. But, maybe, yeah. But also, I think it's important to say that just because a film is the highest grossing film of all time, does not mean to say it is the best film ever made. Avatar, which, another James Cameron film, surpassed Titanic as the highest grossing film. No one ever talks about Avatar anymore. No one. They just don't. It wasn't a great film. I mean, again, the effects were groundbreaking and he put a lot of work into the film. I've watched it and, I mean, I was really unimpressed. There's a reason that people say it's blue Pocahontas.